And with that, we welcome Sara Dickinson to the stage, talking about ADoT, the opportunistic deployment.
Okay, well, thank you for queuing that up very nicely. Now the bear has been poked. I am here to talk about how I still do believe there is a big win to be had with ADoT's deployment. I'm presenting today. Oh, sorry. So I'm here to talk about how I do think there is still a big win to be had with ADoT's deployment. I'm presenting this, but it's on behalf of my co-authors listed here. I'm just going to start with a quick bit of terminology clarification. So we've talked about opportunistic, which is where a client has a policy where it attempts to do an encrypted connection with optional authentication, but is willing to fall back to clear text. This doesn't provide you a security guarantee, but the philosophy behind opportunistic is that you get some protection most of the time. The alternative client policy is to do strict, where a client obtains its credentials securely, either inbound or out of band. Then it requires both an authenticated and an encrypted connection to the server. And if anything goes wrong in either of those two stages, the client hard fails. So these policies have very different security policies, but here what I want to do is revisit the value of opportunistic ADoCs, which I'm going to use the term op ADoCs in my slides for brevity, not limiting it to unilateral probing, but argue that there is still value in this approach. A small bit of history about how we got where we are. We started work on this in the IETF 8 years ago now. And the first 3 years were spent trying to figure out how to do strict in the existing namespace before we abandoned that effort. The working group kind of shrugged its shoulders, and it took another 3 years just to get an experimental RFC out about unilateral probing, and now DPRIVE is closed. And as you've seen from the data, 8 years on from that initial effort, we have a very small footprint, and the rollout has essentially stalled. What are the reasons behind this? Well, we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem. As we've heard, there is absolutely a performance impact of doing ADoCs. But what we also hear is that because of that performance impact, operators are reluctant to enable the encrypted transports with unilateral probing as the only option, because what it means is the second that you open port 853, any recursive resolver doing that will switch 100% of its traffic over to an encrypted resolver, and this is encrypted transport, and this has been seen in the wild. So what operators are asking for is a more sophisticated way to do opportunistic deployment with something that isn't so binary. And so this is something that I think we could genuinely explore in an operator-led environment to do this. And I think we have a really key window here. As you heard, at the moment, we have very few responsibly run resolvers doing probing. So now is the time to get a cohort of authoritative operators together who are willing to explore the opportunities of doing opportunistic in a different way and in an incremental, adaptive rollout that doesn't involve turning everything on at once and not knowing what's going to happen. So I think what's happened in the past is that as technologists, we've got interested in solving the hard problem, which is how to do strict. But the reality is today, what is holding us back is a genuine lack of confidence and understanding of how to roll out these encrypted transports. And in writing this talk, I look back and I thought, we got it wrong. I got it wrong. I was there. 8 years ago, we should have recognized that dichotomy in the way recursive-to-authoritative works. And we should have started from a point of saying, we need one path to understand the transports and get them rolled out. And we need an entirely separate path to look at how to do strict. And the argument I want to make today is it is not too late to do that. We can decouple those two things, and we can still renew the efforts around opportunistic and move the needle on this. So here are my top 3 reasons why it is valuable to continue working on opportunistic ADoCs. So the first one is, obviously, what we get is protection from passive surveillance. That's the whole name of the game of opportunistic. But as a side effect, what you get is that you shift the attack surface. You make attacks so much harder. If you want to attack this, you now have to downgrade the connection or do machine-in-the-middle attack. And this is not only true for privacy, for the surveillance attacks, but it is also true for any injection attacks on the data traveling between the authoritative and the recursive. So we don't defeat these attacks because we're not doing strict, but we make them so much harder and we increase the cost for the attackers. To preempt the outrage here, I am not in any way suggesting that DNS-SEC should be replaced by encrypted transports. The key point I want to make with this bullet point is that if you have encrypted transport as one element of your defense mechanism against post-quantum, it is true to say that post-quantum is moving faster in encrypted transports than it is in DNS-SEC. Okay, so secondly, looking at opportunistic, you can do it in an operator-led, iterative way. We don't need any big changes to the protocol. We don't need changes in the parent zones. And operators can deploy this with their comfort level that they have with minimal risk, because with opportunistic, you always fall back to clear text. What we do need is software implementation, but this is far easier and quicker than anything involving registry updates that might be required to do strict in the future. And just the deployment ease of that massively reduces the costs and makes this the super low path that we can follow to make progress. And lastly, there is already a proposal about how to improve opportunistic beyond unilateral probing. There is a draft that describes authoritative DNS transport signaling that uses service binding records provided in the additional section. This draft is a starting point. The thing that I really like about it is that it's an initial point that we can work from, but there is a whole range of ways that we can evolve this. If we have an experimental code point, we can look at ways of doing different signaling here. We can look at doing active probing. We can look at doing priming. This is the start for an experimental, incremental rollout that we can do with minimizing risk. And the last point is that I believe opportunistic ADoTs will be around for a long time. I think we have to be realistic about when we will reach a point where mainstream resolvers will be willing to hard fail for privacy reasons. Just look around us in the last week about what happens when we see hard failures for DNS-SEC for genuine security reasons, and the mitigations the community is willing to roll out around that. I think there will be a long time, who knows, another 8 years, even more, before mainstream resolvers will routinely hard fail for privacy reasons. And opportunistic is very valuable in that interim. And the last point here is, I think the existing namespace needs a bit of love. You know, we can do some stuff here in the namespace rather than waiting for other mechanisms to do this and then backport it. Additionally, there could be a lot of zone owners who just never have access to newer mechanisms that are being developed, and they still deserve some protection. So to underline this, I think that we have to start by proving that there is confidence and belief that encrypted technologies are viable and feasible at scale. We're not in that position today, and we have to do work there. That will then fund future investment in developing strict mechanisms, which is our long-term goal. A very lightning quick thought experiment. This is where we would all like to be, everything beautifully encrypted, of course. Where we are today, as you've heard, not so much. We have a couple of mechanisms to make the traffic quieter. We have queue name minimization and we have local route. But this is a point where we could try to aim for with opportunistic, which is if we get some of the bigger players involved, what we can do is we can get most of the traffic, some protection, most of the time. And this is about delivering value for end users. They are the ones that will benefit from this. And I believe this is a valid, achievable, and cost-effective intermediate state to aim for on the longer road towards strict everywhere. What else can we specifically do? Well, if we're going to actually make things happen in this area, we do need new implementations because we don't have implementations across the board today. I really do think we need a BCP on this, so we need an operator-led effort to do knowledge sharing. I want to thank OARC and Matthias, who this morning helped me publish the first version of a BCP into the OARC framework. I will post a link to this in the Mattermost when I sit down because it's hot off the press. What we also need is deployment monitoring. So thank you to the previous speaker for the work that they're doing. OARC have also kindly agreed to host a much smaller version of a scanning tool, which again will be running monthly to publish. But the goal here is to create a community of operators who can share their experiences and try and move this effort forward. So to wrap up, I want to go back, and these are the 3 goals that were listed in the introduction of the unilateral probing RFC, and I think these goals still stand. We want to increase protection for users from passive attacks. We want to create a roadmap for moving this forward and learning what we're doing with encrypted transports, and we want a bridge to future options that will improve privacy even more. So to my mind, what I'm hoping comes out of today is that the immediate next steps are engagement with DNS operators, particularly authoritatives in the short term, who are willing to invest and be involved in these experiments around adding signalling to the current opportunistic mechanism so that we can do more gradual rollouts with more confidence. And interop testing around that would be the key next step. So I do believe there's a short-term big win to have if we focus on incremental, achievable improvements, not big bang solutions. And we remember that the focus of this is end-user privacy. That's the goal here. And if we try and do it with minimal investments from operators and both time and resources, which we know are limited. That's everything. Thank you very much. I hope I'm good for time and we have time for questions. Excellent. Thank you.
Ralphie Bakum, not really a question, but you said DELEG-aware resolver should have ADocs, your ADocs implementation. Now, we've written the DELEG-aware resolver, and it was pretty straightforward because it uses the same way how the DNS works currently, just with different kind of record types. The ADoc stuff is a total a kind of like discontinuation on how you do resolution, because you are doing something, you're looking at something in additional record, and then you're doing some other stuff.
So sorry, I didn't actually speak to that point for time. My argument there is that we have recursive resolvers today that have been implemented to be DELEG-aware. DELEG is orthogonal to the encrypted transports. It's something that will come out of it long term. My argument is around the fact that at some point, when DELEG does do signaling for encrypted transports, that it would be you will have to implement upstream encrypted transports in those resolvers. Those resolvers don't necessarily have that today. What would be nice to see is early implementation of the upstream transports supporting opportunistic ahead of implementing it solely for the purpose of DELEG.
So again, our resolver has had encrypted transport outgoing and going for years. That's not the problem. The problem is that if DELEG implements authoritative encrypted transport, it gives a clear signal for the resolver, I have to use this. And then the resolver does that. If it fails, bad luck. Unless you have other DELEG parameters that are still allowable unencrypted transport. Whereas with the ADoc stuff, you have something, you now look at an additional part of the packet, and then you have to do a total different processing to do some kind of like connection and possibly validating the connection, because that's the next step, which is totally out of the way of how resolvers work. So it's even more complex than unilateral probing. That's why I think, given the complexity that resolvers already have, this doesn't work. I also want to encrypt the recursive-to-authoritative, but I think would be better off in getting on with DELEG and doing the encrypted transport there.
I would love to be able to say that DELEG was a realistic possibility in the next couple of years, everywhere available for everybody. I don't think that's the case. I don't
think that will be available either, because Resolve, will not implement that because it's
I think that's a community
complex
decision. If people decide that this is a viable option to expend resources on, and that, and the reality is it doesn't need big changes to the protocol to do it, we can do this very experimentally, then that's something that will give us a shorter term benefit than having to wait for DELEG to be available widely. I refer you to the previous
protocol on the wire
one.
might be easy. The resolver implementation is awfully complex.
Yeah, but we already have several that implement unilateral probing, and I agree there's a complexity layer on top of it, but we're not starting from no implementations.
Johan Stenstam, as everyone understands, I'm obviously in favor of this. I just want to point out that as a community, we have a failure here. As Sara said, we started an entire IETF working group to solve this problem, and we failed. And the years pass by, and the problem doesn't exactly go away. It just becomes more and more urgent, more and more important to solve. And with all respect to Ralph's point about software complexity, and especially resolver software complexity, which I am in no way ignoring or disagreeing with, I think if we look at this as a software implementation problem rather than a user privacy issue, we sort of are looking at this from the wrong point of view. This is about user privacy in a world where user privacy is under attack. This is an issue where we have a chance of sort of, instead of being an embarrassment, of soon being the last important the last important internet protocol which isn't encrypted, sort of getting out of the penalty box before it becomes a really even more of a disgrace. And now there are suggestions on the table for how to do this rather simply, without changing the entire namespace, only implementing some software and gaining attention from operators to really make a change. And in today's rather consolidated DNS marketplace, it really makes a change if, let's say, less than 10 big authoritatives do this, and less than 10 big recursives do this, and it makes a change for the planet. If we fail again, well, we're already in the penalty box from a point of view of not encrypting DNS. Do we want to stay there, or do we want to do something about it?
Paul Hoffman, ICANN, wearing way too many document author hats for this presentation. Sara, since you are behind the don't wait for DELEG, do this other thing, do you believe those two will be able to interact successfully depending on which one is first?
I do.
Or do you think that someone's going to have to like cut off between, like if yours comes out first versus if the DELEG comes out first, that there will have to be a changeover?
I don't. I believe the two could actually exist together, because that's one of the other things
in the
that
same,
I didn't.
like zone file and such.
Yeah, because
Okay.
the proposals around transport signaling are based around service binding records, and DELEG is developing sort of a different set of keys around that. So I think the two can be compatible with each other, and I hope this acts as a transition towards that and can inform what DELEG does if we get information in this namespace early enough about what works with the signaling. I don't see them conflicting.
Okay.
I may be over-optimistic, but I hope I see them informing each other.
Okay, because I'm worried about them conflicting because we're both coming out at the same time. I mean, the first DELEG secure transport draft will be out within weeks. You've gotten yours out and such. And so I don't mind which one wins, but I do mind if some people want this one, some people want this one. And by the way, I'm with Ralph because I did the other implementation of DELEG as a recursive resolver. And it was a few hours, like on the resolver side, it really was just a few hours of effort to get in. And I believe yours would actually, as Ralph said, be harder to do to get to that point. But it also isn't waiting for all of DELEG. So
I mean, the thing is, I think I thought the comments very early on the earlier talk about DNSSEC were very interesting, that you can solve a problem technically, but it doesn't give you the process answer. This is designed to avoid the process. This is in the hands of operators and implementers only, and that's why I think it has a fighting chance of moving forward and changing things. But I want this to be the stepping stone to hopefully what DELEG is, enabling strict. That's the goal. That's where we want to be.
Actually,
the fact that it's so hard to put a timescale on when that's going to deliver is the thing that concerns me, that if we don't do this, we have another decade before we have widespread encrypted transports. So,
to be clear, DELEG, are we done? Okay, let's you and I talk about this because, and let's talk in public, like in the DELEG discussions and such. I think it needs to be done, unfortunately, in the IETF. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.